Hi everyone, my name is Signe. I'm an architecture researcher and designer.
Sorry Signe, can you share the screen through Zoom?
Oh, did I not?
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Share screen.
I would better just do the whole screen.
Okay.
Yeah. That's fine. Perfect.
Cool. So yeah, I'm an architecture researcher and designer. I've practiced as an architect, but recently I've been kind of going into more of like an ecological, environmental focused architecture discourse. And I'm going to talk about my forestry related practices today. Can you? Is it not changing? Doesn't seem to want to change.
Arrows, clicking.
What do you have? PowerPoint? Is it
Spacebar?
Spacebar?
No.
No, it's not changing. Is it?
That's an odd way of going through.
Yeah. Oh, maybe this is gonna work. Knowing. Okay. But the videos aren't working.
Maybe you need to press the bar to press.
No, sadly, there's both of them are videos.
So these are videos. Okay,
Yeah.
let's check if we can get those working.
But they're.
Can we try this one again? Or do we get this weird?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So the first project I'm going to talk about is marine forest architecture. And a year's time ago, I did a research residency in Nida Art Colony. And I started the research by kind of focusing on two primary locations. One is the Baltic-wide context of looking at the resource management of forestry within the Baltics, and then also looking at Nida in particular and looking at the very kind of unique aspects of the local forestry methods. There's two things, like it's quite interesting about like why I use mapping and GSI methods and data analysis in my work, and kind of understanding what is the wider context of why these forests are the way they are, and kind of starting to look at what is a protected land and what that means for a forest locally, and how these methods are still used to essentially mark some areas as protected while still being quite frequently extracted for forestry. So in the sense of the Baltics, it uses Swedish forestry methods to kind of speculate that actually this is sustainable to frequently use forests essentially as agriculture to clear cut and then replant as seedlings and then renew these places. But then in reality, what is created is a very monoculturalized land. And essentially in the Baltics, only 1% of the entirety of the forests are primary or original or ancient land. And everything else has essentially been human touched and changed. And then I kind of, that's not me, but I looked at Nida in particular and kind of looked at what people understand as being forests. So essentially these landscapes that we perceive as forest land are quite diverse, and forests that are mapped on the map, which on the map says this is ancient forest land, this is biodiversity land. In reality, these are very different landscapes, and these constitute that people that they're essentially human touched and they're human kind of made, and essentially are these lands that are monocultures and are agriculture in its own way. I wrote an article for the Forest as a Journal that kind of that stipulated on the biomass infrastructure exports and the influence on the local markets. And the kind of like the realization of this is that Granular Invest, which is Estonian-based company, but owns a lot of land all across the Baltics and a lot of wood pellet factories. That essentially is this green energy. Burning wood pellets is technically green energy by Kyoto Protocol standards, which was established in the 90s. But in reality, when burning wood pellets for energy, it actually takes up more energy than coal would, but it's still green. So when kind of shipped away from the Baltics, when kind of monoculturalized these lands, it feeds into the green strategy goals of Western countries like Belgium, Amsterdam, and the UK especially. So that kind of like established this connection, what the Baltic forests are and how they're being changed by these green deals that essentially are harming the forests locally. And then my second project, which I've been doing in the last year's time, I wanted to look at kind of this conjunction between analyzing the local extraction methods, and kind of stipulating and connecting them with what is understood as kind of like forest worshipping or forest kind of like social connection with the forest that the Baltics essentially have. And now I'm gonna play sound. Next. What do I?
Play sound, you just need to unmute your speakers.
The project aims to achieve understanding the way considered farmhouse and commercial farms and finding value in non-profitable forest in hopes of creating a speculative world where humans see forest as equal. Forest knows no borders. Each part of this is connected through the communication of the particles and the network of the fungi, spores, seeds, and animals that spread the forest. As a non-binary and non-human species, forest is all-encompassing. Through centuries of silviculture practices, forests were cut in managed patches. As one develops, it is quicker. The ground is harrowed and planted with 3 seasons, after they are thinned and then clear-cut again. The majority of the Baltic forests have been treated such practices, leaving only 1% as primary forest land. Once covered in a mix of different tree species, around 70% of the territories are now covered with just 2 most profitable, Scots pine and spruce. The site of the project is a clear-cut, an eco-assemblage where most of the carbon and fungi have been uprooted by violent practices of timber logging, leaving it so bare and without any of its intended purpose of the forest. Left to either slowly regenerate through long processes of recovery or most commonly quickly replanted with pine saplings in neat rows, forming what will soon be another monoculture to be extracted. The side of a clear-cut is a place of potential, a man-made tabula rasa, space and time to break a perpetual cycle of extraction. Over the last decade, there has been an almost 2-fold increase in logging within the Baltics. This is not circumstantial and can be explained with Europe's insatiable appetite for biomass, which accounts for 1/4 of total extractions. Biomass has somehow created an idea that there is a greener kind of carbon, one that's emissions is less harmful for the environment. Carbon neutrality is a fairy tale. It is a fictional way of streaming nature's solutions for the gain of not changing existing human practices. Humans have gained the imaginary perspective of simply continuing exploiting the forest for energy without understanding the complexities and the stable nature of naturally occurring ethos and legends. Classified as renewable energy, in reality these landscapes are burned.
Yeah, so the project kind of found this. Oh, can you hear me now? Yeah. So the project kind of wanted to find this conjunction between finding an existing clear cut and looking at how could this landscape that essentially has been agriculturized and profitized and capitalized for many years, how can it be kind of like regained and reinvested into creating this kind of bioverse within the forestry, and how you can kind of gradually repurpose these lands to then encompass this notion that actually these non-human landscapes have agency, and how can you kind of manifest this agency through ritual and human-made interventions. So the site I found was near Vestleiten, so it kind of has these connections to Harnu National Park, and it also it's technically protected by Natura 2000, but then being, as seen in the video, kind of like also very structurally fragmented into these like very patchy biodiversity scapes. So the project is essentially a ritual-made structure that would deal with several interventions that would last over something of 500 years, and it would start by selectively picking out pine trees to cut on site, drying them within nearby made facilities, and then using those pines to create a scaffold that would then be in place to shape and form a ritual-made landscape. So by collecting seeds in these seed pots kind of distributed within identified biodiversity hotspots within the area, and then this seed pot would be used in the ritual within the ritual of seeding this pavilion. Whilst dried on site, these elements would be used in the scaffold later to create an infrastructure space that would essentially shape a possible scenario for a pavilion, a stage where essentially the stage takes the shape of a performance of forest growing. And this walk would be organized to two meeting points in the landscape and kind of be organized as a seeding ritual with kind of Pelne shoes and kind of explaining how this landscape kind of occurs and how this biology space could be made as a type of architecture that essentially is designed and created and made by the forest, but kind of established by the human. So it established this connection and of understanding, but then also regenerates and repurposes these lands. And this is, I'm conscious that I'm running short on time, so I'm just going to jump right into the film. And this has sound too. Should I?
Yeah.
Yes. It's weird that it's lagging. So yeah, so I guess my kind of question is, yeah, my question that you wanted me to leave behind was like, how can modified human behavior, how can we modify human behavior to develop that, for it to be developed was a notion that non-human worlds have agency and standing and value that we can't assess from a perspective of an anthropocentric viewpoint. How can we reestablish a mentality that human can kind of understand as a part of the world rather than the center of it? Yeah.
Once it's been constructed, would it be left for nature to take over? Or?
Yeah, so it kind of works in a 500 years span, but then within the first 50 years, yearly you would have to come back and tie the trees to the scaffold for it to kind of take this shape. But in the 50 years time, as the scaffolding will already start to disintegrate because it's made from biodegradable materials, you would take away the leftovers of it and kind of leave the pavilion to grow on its own. But then that would stipulate that with 450 years, its origins of creation would somewhat be forgotten, in some ways creating a myth of a place, because the kind of like the structural interventions, human-made interventions, would kind of disappear within the landscape and create this somewhat unbeknownst origin space of nature that would then still contain this structure.
Do you have a location in mind already?
I was near Center. I found a site that it's near Hannu, like Estonian border. Yeah, I wanted to find something that was clearly kind of extracted quite a bit, located within Natura 2000, state-owned, yet declining biodiversity. So kind of like a hotspot. Can you discuss?
I think also the other question is, would be really interesting to talk about that, this time scale. So for all these slow projects and growing projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, how can you contain something that's out of your reach?
Yeah, time is one thing. And the other, I think, are these feedback loops, how far actually we can go with our imagination, so how we affect something.
Yeah.
Yeah.